We all face rejection in life, but some people take it much harder than others. Why is that? If you find yourself reacting particularly strongly to rejection, or someone you know does, you might like to listen in to what your next guest has to say. Dr. Rachel Hannam is a psychologist from North Brisbane Psychologists. Good evening, Rachel.
Hi, Ashwin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Now, you've mentioned to me during the setup that there's a condition called rejection-sensitive dysphoria. What is that?
Yeah, well, that's not a technical diagnosis, but rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a fancy academic name that psychologists and psychiatrists like to use to describe the kind of intense funk or, pain and discomfort that a person might experience long after, minutes, hours, or days after the experience of rejection. As you said in your intro, we all experience rejection. Perhaps we've asked for help, or we've asked for feedback, or asked someone out on a date, or tried to bring up a difficult conversation, and we've experienced rejection. But some people are so sensitive, as the name implies, to that rejection that they have a disproportionate or excessive reaction that lasts longer and maybe happens more often for them and is more intense. And dysphoria, refers to this sort of intense discomfort, shame or anxiety that people feel. And this term, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is often included in other academic and health-related labels such as attention deficit disorder, ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, bipolar or borderline personality disorder. Certain disorders are more likely to kind of leave a person vulnerable to rejection sensitivity.
Why do some people develop this extra level of sensitivity to rejection?
Well, it is a bit chicken and egg. If someone is neurodivergent, so say they have ADHD or ASD, which has a strong genetic component or risk factor to it anyway, then because of how their brain is wired, they'll be more prone to rejection sensitivity and the dysphoria that comes from that. Other people may have a history of trauma. I mean, some people have both, but a history of trauma can leave a person more prone to this intense reaction to rejection. And they think on a scientific or neurological level, the connections between our frontal lobe, our prefrontal cortex, and our limbic system in the middle of our brain, which has our amygdala and other parts, the linkages aren't working as well as they might. And that person might miss details in their social environment or misinterpret other people's behaviour in their social environment. They may have a lot of trouble thinking about how they're feeling, thinking about what happened, so they don't appraise the situation accurately. And their executive functioning, like self-soothing, problem-solving, taking action to, do something about the situation or make a decision that there's nothing actually they have to do because they haven't done anything wrong. This is all part of our prefrontal cortex executive functioning. And if that's not working properly with the emotional centres of our brain, then that makes it much harder to shake off rejection.
Is this quite a difficult condition for someone to self-diagnose?
Well, I think this is becoming a more frequently used term. I notice that my clients are coming in and now telling me they've got rejection sensitivity, and as I said, they've often got other things going on as well. And so there's more awareness of it, so it's good we're talking about it. And yeah, it's a very hard one to work with, but we can work with it because it's a bit of a chicken and egg vicious cycle. People with extreme rejection sensitivity may be more avoidant, so they may not socialise as much as the average person, which makes it harder for them to build their confidence and social skills. Or they may do things when they're in interactions with other people that actually make it more likely that they'll get rejected. So because of their anxiety, they may actually make offhand comments or behave in ways that are socially inappropriate, which then actually gets them the slightly dirty looks or the side eye. And then they have this rejection sensitivity, so they feel even worse, which makes their behaviour kind of less socially appropriate. And so these poor people can often get into this vicious cycle, if that makes sense.
You're listening to Dr. Rachel Hannam, a psychologist from North Brisbane Psychologists, talking to us about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Do people with this often find others are unsympathetic towards them and tell them they just need to toughen up?
Yeah, I mean, that can happen if they come across as sensitive, vulnerable, or avoidant, they may receive that criticism. But the other way that this rejection sensitivity can come across socially is people who, feel particularly sensitive and anxious are often shame-prone. What we mean by shame-prone in psychology is, they tend to feel embarrassed and humiliated and afraid of negative evaluation, and then they lash out. They maybe go into blame and they vacillate between who's to blame, I'm to blame, no, they're to blame, and they can end up, being a bit aggressive, critical, contemptuous towards other people. So they can actually put people off and push people away from them. But actually deep down, they're very, very sensitive to rejection. So it's a bit tragic because it's a kind of self-sabotage.
Are they also, because of their fear of rejection, less likely to take risks, to start a business, to go overseas and do the things that can create an interesting life?
Some definitely, yeah. There's actually a 9-item test that people can Google. I found it on Psychology Today, called the Rejection Sensitivity Test, and it has 9 scenarios, like asking a friend if you can loan money, asking a supervisor for help, asking for feedback, asking someone out on a date, trying to bring up a concern or an unresolved issue with a friend or family member. And you had to say on a scale of 1 to 6 if you thought it would go pretty well if you did that, or if you expected a negative reaction from the other person. And people who score high on rejection sensitivity, who expect negative reactions, not surprisingly, are more likely to avoid making themselves vulnerable and doing those things like asking for help, asking people out on a date, putting themselves out there. They're probably also less likely to become stand-up comics, I would imagine.
Yes, so many costs to this lifestyle. But on the flip side, Rachel, are there any advantages to this condition? Does it correlate with greater kindness or paying more attention?
Well, like the term sensitivity is in the title, right? Rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. And that sensitivity that we see in folk who have, say, ADHD or ASD, I mean, there can be a real sort of talent or strength in that. At times, everything's context dependent. But that kind of sensitivity to other people's feelings and behaviour and to our own feelings can be useful if we can sort of tame it and master it. And yeah, I've certainly met plenty of neurodivergent folk who are amazing artists or very sensitive therapists, or in some other way use their sensitivity to channel a kind of emotional, creative impulse into something, of value. And often they do struggle because they're highly sensitive people.
They're highly sensitive people, and it feels like we're entering a more dog-eat-dog world, more casual work, a declining art scene perhaps. There seems to be less and less place for vulnerable, sensitive people in that kind of dog-eat-dog, everyone in it for themselves, social media-rich world.
Mm. Yeah, look, I would say so. And yet there are things we can do. There are community groups. There are spaces which are, non-judgmental, which are, like I've got a client who recently joined an online dream school, and she said it's such a non-judgmental place where they'll analyse their dreams. I've got clients who've done 12-step programs. They describe those groups as very non-judgmental groups. So there are safe spaces, and I often recommend to my clients that they curate their news feed on social media very carefully because, like my Facebook page, North Brisbane Psychologists, there are online spaces which are aimed at, fun, interesting content and a supportive, non-judgmental space. But we do have to be very careful about who we allow into our spaces, both in person and online. So there are ways we can manage and curate our lives, and then there are strategies, there are things we can do to manage this.
That sounds good, because normally we think about what we put into our bodies, food and physical, but emotionally, socially, we perhaps think about that less. So that sounds like a good idea. Curate. It's the word of the decade, but there's a good mental health place for it. Yeah,
exactly. And then, I can't leave this conversation without emphasising a couple of regular practices such as mindfulness and self-compassion practices, because people with rejection sensitivity are prone to shame, so prone to negative self-evaluation. And one of the best practices as the antidote for that is to practice self-compassion, to try new ways of speaking to yourself, remembering that you're just human, everyone makes mistakes, and talking to yourself in a way that you would to a friend. You might say to a friend, like, it really wasn't that bad. You really haven't done anything wrong. You're only human. You're allowed to mess up sometimes. And there are actual, whole bodies of work on self-compassion and a myriad of ways of practicing it. So if anyone listening has rejection sensitivity, definitely get into self-compassion.
I think, and you sent me some things that people can tell themselves if they have rejection sensitivity, dysphoria, to soothe. Here's some things that you mentioned to me, and maybe you can comment on one or two of these. Here's what you should tell yourself. Everyone doesn't secretly hate you. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. Your intrusive thoughts are lying to you. Most people aren't scrutinizing everything you do. You're not a bad person for mistakes you've made. The people in your life want to be there. What can you tell us about some of those affirmations?
I did. I texted that to you earlier, didn't I?
Yes.
It's all coming back to me. Yeah, I mean, these are the kinds of affirmations we need to learn off by heart, learn by rote, and start to say to ourselves. And different ones will resonate for different people, and we all have different issues, but I mean, what you've just read out, that list of affirmations, is much more in line with reality. So, I mean, do you think so? When you read them out, do you think that they're true statements?
They sound sensible. And we were talking about the negativity bias, which is something you taught me about a couple of years ago. And that seems to be getting in the way of these beliefs. So, this is the antidote to the negativity bias.
Exactly, the negativity bias, which makes our minds naturally look for threat and danger and for the worst case interpretations, and we do have to guard against that. All of us, not just those with strong rejection sensitivity, but all of us need to take stock, step back from our own automatic thoughts, have second thoughts instead of just first thoughts, and think to ourselves, you know what, I actually didn't do anything wrong, or if maybe I did, I could check it out. One of the things I just want to say, I tell my clients a really powerful question if they're feeling this dysphoria and this shame after an interaction is say to themselves, did I actually do anything wrong? I make a flowchart on the whiteboard. Yes, no, maybe. If the answer is no, you can let it go. If it's yes, then go to guilt, not shame. Guilt makes us ask the question, how can I make it right? So is there anything I can do? Can I say sorry? Can I make it up to the person? And if the answer is maybe I did something wrong, then check it out. Ask that person, your friend or colleague, hey, yesterday when I said that thing, or did I talk too much last weekend when we were out together, or, are you upset with me for whatever it is? Check it out. Be brave. And the person might say, no, it's fine. Okay, then you can let it go. Or they might say, well, yeah, I was a bit put out by that. I was a bit upset. And you can say, I thought you might be, and I'm really sorry. And so we've got to do some reality testing, because so often people feel guilt and shame for things that they haven't actually done anything wrong. So it's unhealthy shame and guilt. So, really kind of checking. I'm not suggesting people just be self-compassionate and don't correct their own errors, but that, we just try and get a bit more of a grip on the reality of ourselves because, none of us is perfect.
Yeah, very good advice. And sometimes it's nice to have a picture of letting go, something in your head. I was told a story when I was at university about two monks in an all-male monastery. So they've got that celibacy monastic life, and they're walking by the river, and there's a woman that wants to cross to the other side, and she's having a bit of trouble. Maybe she's an older lady, I think. And one of the monks picks her up and helps her across the river. And they get across, and the two monks keep on walking. And the first monk says to the second, we're not supposed to have any contact with the opposite sex. Why did you pick that woman up across the river? And he said, I left her by the river. Are you still carrying her? And it was just this really nice message for letting go. Everything's in the past. So whenever I do something embarrassing or something that makes me cringe, I think about those monks and, are you still carrying that thing by the river? I left it by the river. So it's nice to have a story about letting go to help you let go.
That's beautiful. And in psychology, we call that rumination. So worrying about the past is called rumination. We ruminate and chew things over in our mind. And even knowing, I'm ruminating. I don't have to ruminate. I can be here, right now. And having a little story like that too can be very helpful. But that's a big part of it is mindfulness. People with rejection sensitivity often do need to learn mindfulness, both so they can pay attention to what's happening here and now so they don't misinterpret rejection, but also so they can let things go, as you just said.
Wonderful message. Thank you for introducing us to rejection sensitivity, Rachel. I hadn't thought about it till this evening, so I appreciate you coming on and talking about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ashwin.
That's Dr. Rachel Hannam, who's a psychologist from North Brisbane Psychologists.